Well, students, hello and welcome. So, we are into our third conversation on Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the Genevan Swiss philosopher and thinker of politics, music, and even of morality. An immensely influential philosopher. The essence of the political thought of Rousseau is, of course, the general will. The general will is the methodological essence of the social contract. And the example we have pursued last time was the example of a club or an association. Though one might raise an objection that in a club, we are voluntary members. We unite voluntarily. But in a state, right, we are not voluntary members. Our membership, in a sense, is compulsory. But the important part of Rousseau is the kind of thinking that he's doing. He is not dependent on the state. He is not dependent on sovereignty or the sovereign, right? He is rather trying to argue how people would govern themselves, right? It is a kind of self-governance, self-rule, self-sufficiency, and self-adequacy, right? So, to understand that, we should, make a quick detour, a quick reference to a kind of experiment that was undertaken in the 80s in IIT, by the IIT Kharagpur in India, in West Bengal. They undertook an experiment called the CCA, Convergent Community Action. The plan of this program was that there will be some facilitators who will go to the villages. Some villages were, examined and adopted for this experiment. And the villagers would be, taken into confidence and conversation. And by virtue of this conversation, the villagers will sit, they will identify the problems, they will sort of, pose a budget for themselves. These problems, this budget, then after, the community sort of pools from its own resources, the kind of plan that it has made. This will be sent to the state. The state will allocate its resources. The state will define its budget, and that will go to the people, and the people will administer that plan among themselves and for themselves. This experiment was in fact successful in some form. It was again replicated in the late 90s in South 24 Parganas in West Bengal, right? This Convergent Community Action, CCA, as you see, has basically a Rousseauian origin. It's a model that explicates and explains the thought of Rousseau, the kind of self-rule, the general will of people that will be effective in the self-organization of the people. But not only 80s and 90s, in the 19th century itself, Rousseau was one of the most prominent thinkers to be quoted in India. For instance, about the young Bengal movement in 19th century Bengal, and Desrosiers was a prominent herald in that kind of movement, where Desrosiers often would quote Rousseau and the, example of the French Revolution in order to make explicit the value and the import, the implication, and the effectivity of the freedom of thought. What is free thinking? Rousseau is then the model of a free thinker in general, right? Now, after, Desrosiers or the young Bengal, even before that, there are strands of thinkers, from, say, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee to Rabindranath Tagore, Bhudev Mukherjee, all of them would invoke Rousseau. Now, interestingly, as we had said last time, we were quoting the question of a club or a corporate company, right? The way some people come together to form an association as an sort of, exemplary icon in this exemplary index to justify general will and the social contract. Incidentally, Bankim Chandra, in fact, quotes this kind of an example to give effect to this kind of thinking, which has had its origins in Rousseau. He says that in society, all people come together And the society is formed by the consent of those who constitute a society. I mean, society is a product of the consent of its members. Like, business people, they come together, businessmen, and they form certain rules and form, for instance, a joint stock company. Rousseau, Bankim says, similarly, says society, state, government, right, is an exercise in a similar manner. This instrumentality, this instrumentation, right, and this exercise, this implementation is a similar case in point. Bhudev Mukherjee, for instance, in conservative sociological thinker, 19th century sociological thinker of Bengal, he quotes, for instance, Locke and Hegel, Locke particularly because we are studying Locke, and tries to, sort of address the mechanistic and organic conception of society. Finally, the example of Gandhi would be exemplary in this instance, because Gandhi not only denounced modern civilization as if in the tracks of Rousseau, but also the particular indexes of modern civilization, say railways, modern medicine, legal system, all he had denounced for a particular instance of Swaraj or self-rule, self-governance. As you see, Mahatma Gandhi and his notion of self-rule and denounce the kind of his dismissal, disavowal of modern civilization could be traced back to, Rousseau. But when it comes to the legal system, this part, the last time which I think we had not addressed, but let me sort of chip in a bit of Rousseauian thinking on law, because that will, supplement the kind of discussion that we're having. When it comes to law, now we say that, we have a legal system, we have courts, and people when they are, they are in disputes, they cannot settle the argument within themselves, they go to the court for litigation. Now, what Rousseau is saying, that you could have laws, but laws are only valid if the laws are made by us, and these laws are, they are exercised on us. They are administered on us. But this law, the authorship, should be made by us. This is very important, and this is significant. In fact, this kind of thinking where laws are made by us, those laws will be affected by us. I mean, kind of stick, for instance, that you are supposed to make. And this stick will be sent back to you. This is the core essence of, what you call participatory democracy, and a discursive democratic approach to law, and which is, sort of making its rounds in particular, for instance, in today's Germany, which is known as discursive democracy, deliberative democracy, where people come and discuss. So, what Rousseau is saying that generally we take laws as, significantly watertight compartments. But we don't question whether we agree with these laws or not. Rousseau is saying those laws are most legitimate, most valid, where those laws are authored by us, where we participate in the making of that law. Apart from the question of law, you must also know that Rousseau was not very satisfied with the legal, conception of mankind and legal conception of society or the community. In fact, here is a problem which the Rousseauian thought, runs into generally. Is, as you remember, I mean, nature, there is an innocence in nature, and the moment we enter society, we get into we get corrupt, or the corruptibility of us becomes clear, like light. But this will run into problem when he talks about children, because as we had said previously, I mean, Rousseau is a thinker of education also. And in his book, Emile, he talks about extensively on education, and much of his theories have been taken into account today. Now, one of his, theses in that book is children are, naturally good, but they're also, corrupted by society. But the type of education, the kind of mechanical, education that we have, trying to make them cope to our kind of urban, corrupt atmosphere and norms, whatever, trying to make them clever, trying to make them achiever, is absolutely misleading. Now, what is it to say? We are not going into the details of how to, gain from experience. Education should be, sort of occurring under sort of natural circumstances, in a natural setting. We're not going to all this. But suppose, when he's talking about children, he's talking about children as innocent, unless otherwise educated naturally, right? In fact, that is not education at all, if one is educated naturally. But besides this, if he is corrupted, right, then corrupted socially through particular forms of mechanical, instrumental education, one might say, then what does it mean to pose the whole humankind as being natural in the state of nature and corrupt the moment we, found or form society? Because then mankind is nearly equal to being children, right? So this is a problem that, Rousseau never, gets over. These are problems of his thought in general. And but besides this problem, Rousseau is an illuminating thinker, as you know. And when it comes to human nature, the differences with Hobbes and Locke are clear. Where Hobbes thinks that human nature in the state of nature is brutish, selfish, short, right? Locke thinks they are rational, and Rousseau thinks innocent but corruptible. Now, if this is what is happening, then one might say, in the case of Rousseau, that if human beings are corruptible in the surrounding of society, in the context of society, then his contract as a problem-solving procedure is also a kind of corruption. If not so, then social contract itself should, be left out of the corruptibility of human nature, of human society in general. Social contract then is an exercise sort of in innocence. Does it send us back to innocence? That's the question. Now, another significant difference with Locke and Hobbes is, Rousseau's, is after the social contract, right? Then in the instance of Hobbes, what emerges is a Leviathan, an indestructible state, right? What emerges in Locke is a kind of constitutional government, limited by law and for protection of life, liberty, property. But for Rousseau, none of these actually happens. He talks about a contract which is by the people and for the people, really. There, no freedom is given up, no rights are given up, right? People are the sovereign. Now, if these are the differences of, Rousseau with Locke and Hobbes, the major differences, then I think we have sort of crossed a particular threshold. We can sort of approach the terminal part of this discussion by trying to point out, in fact, I'll urge you to look at these issues, these writings of Rousseau, where Rousseau is, writing his autobiography in Confessions. He is sort of as a solitary walker, right? He used to walk a lot. He is sort of memorizing his walk and trying to give it a point, inferring something from it. In fact, here Rousseau is an all-round thinker, and a multi-personal thinker. And it talks much more about Rousseau than his explicit, political writings when he's talking about inequality or the social contract. When Rousseau is talking about walking, apart from the question of passions, loving, that we had, covered previously in our last lecture. When he is talking about walking, Rousseau is saying that when I walk, I don't ever ask another person to give me an address, right? But rather, I sort of take on a map with me. Here a map of, say, for instance, Paris or whatever. He says after a lot of, lot of labor, lot of struggle, I would be, successful. I would be through with the map. I would be successful in locating the place where I want to go. And after, this kind of ordeal, when I finally have arrived at that place, the joy is immense. The joy is immense because, and this points out to the, self-governing, instinctive, appraisal and the emotion of Rousseau, where he wants to make, people God really, right? We are the rulers in real time and real sense. He says, because when I ask somebody, where is this place? I'm dependent on his knowledge. He might mislead me also, right? When I, pick up a map from myself, from my own pocket, right? This map as if it is in my head, and try to sort of crack my brains, I use the map and arrive at the place. I have immense pleasure because I have exercised my thinking to its own consequences. I have not been dependent on others. Rousseau, in the similar sense, is arguing that people, as a self-governing whole, they should be satisfied with themselves. People are the sovereign. No other ruler above in a relationship of domination and subordination can actually achieve what the people themselves can achieve. In a similar vein, in fact, one might also surmise this example of walking, walking and being a self-dependent walker, a traveler, is a kind of education which Rousseau, projects as a kind of instance for posterity, for the whole humanity. The kind of, natural, where, you'll have many instances. For instance, a religious thinker like Vivekananda would say that education is a manifestation, of perfection already in man. Now, this perfectibility is a word which belongs to Rousseau. And education is a manifestation which is already in man. This is what Rousseau is saying when he's talking about traveling alone without taking help of others. So Rousseau is immensely effective in, making these points, the self-governance of people, through non-political examples rather than the explicit political ones. And I'll urge you to take to those non-political writings rather than those explicitly political ones. Again, similar, exercise Rousseau holds on to when he talks about, book writing. He says, when I try to write a book, when I see, for instance, in Paris, a table full of, writing sort of instruments, books, I absolutely feel devastated. I feel tortured and tormented because I desist. I hate the apparatus of labor, right? So how does Rousseau write a book? Rousseau says, they're like, threads or shreds of paper that sort of are strewn around me, right? I suddenly bring them together. I stitch them, right? And then this is the way I write a book. It is as if the accident of chapters suddenly becomes a book for Rousseau. Rousseau was then an incidenter and sort of an author of incidents, an author of everyday life, which we find even, today also we find, the table, the writing apparatus, the computer, the keyboard, the whole apparatus of labor that Rousseau would have desisted. This is not the way that one could, write a book, for instance. Otherwise, then the Google, then the book, then the sort of pen, then the computer and the keyboard and the whole stock of, operating systems and procedures would have generated new and original thoughts, every second. It doesn't do so. Now, this kind of, Rousseau finds kind of not at home in such an urban, constellations. He is, in fact, very wary of, corrupt company. He talks about solitude and solitariness, right? He, in fact, talks about the art of, detecting false friends. One might say, extending this argument in our parliamentary democracy, one might be able, people should be able, through some instrumentation, some procedure, be able to detect false representatives. In fact, Rousseau is wary of representation in general. And when he talks about general will, people coming together, he is also wary about, factionalism and all kinds of typical politicking that happens, the dominance of majority and all kinds of stuff. Rousseau desists also the commerce with men. Why does he desist? Why doesn't he like to be with or to be in the company of men in society? He said these are basically people who are afraid of dying, but at the same time they're bored with living. But while they are dying instantly, they are dying every hour. There's an instant death of all of us. But at the same time, we are scared of death. We are scared of death because we are bored with living. Rousseau, in the final and illuminating instance, says that the problem is, here I find, each teaches the other the art of being happy while not being happy himself. You might wonder and recall that in India today there is a particular program called the Art of Living. Now one might say that if you have really mastered the art of living, then why are you preaching to other people the art of living? Because if you have mastered the art of living, if living is an art and not a science or whatever, then you're already self-sufficient, self-adequate, and you absolutely be withdrawn to yourself. You are yourself, right? You are absolutely locked into you. But when you say that I want to preach, I want to teach the art of living to others, then there is a genuine problem. It is what Rousseau recalls, that it's teaching the other the art of being happy while you are being unhappy yourself. Rousseau is absolutely, he's very hard taskmaster, and he goes very hard on this deception, this hypocrisy that not only modern, so-called postmodern life in the world, in most of the world, even in India, that haunts and torments us and prevents us from being happy. Rousseau apparently would seem is a very happy thinker in general. But, Rousseau and the kinds of thinkers like Rousseau, they are neither happy nor unhappy. Because, as he will say again and again, I'm not happy because my happiness should be a product of general will. Unless you are happy, unless all are happy, I cannot be happy. Unless I am happy and each of us are happy, all cannot be happy. This symptomatic sort of reciprocity, this I and you, we-ness, he and she, this kind of complete picture and picture thinking is available in Rousseau. And that is why he is so effective and so illuminating thinker even today in the world and in India.